she was never meant to stay, Alaric. She was a placeholder until the real queen arrived. Those were the words Seraphine heard through the carved oak door of the war room, spoken in the low, satisfied voice of her mother-in-law, and they hit her spine like a blade sliding between two vertebrae. She stopped breathing. The corridor of Thornhold Keep had never felt so cold, though the torches burned exactly as they always had, throwing long amber shadows across the ancient stone. Somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where the mating bond had lived warm and steady for 3 years, something began to tear. It was not a metaphor. Among her kind, the bond was a real and physical thing, a cord of shared warmth strung between two souls, and she felt it fray now like rope pulled across a jagged edge, thread by thread, each snapping loose with a small, bright flare of pain that made her press a hand flat against her sternum. She didn't scream. That was the first choice, and she made it before she even understood she was making it. A lesser woman would have thrown open the door. She stood instead in the dark hallway, palm to her chest, and let the words settle into her like sediment. A placeholder, until the real queen arrived. 3 years of nights spent binding wounds after border skirmishes, 3 years of quiet counsel that had kept the pack fed through 2 brutal winters, 3 years of a love she had believed was the truest thing in her life, all of it reduced in a single sentence to a chair being kept warm for someone worthier. And then his voice, her husband's voice, the voice of Alaric Thornhold, Alpha King of the Ravenmoor territories, the voice that had once whispered her name like a vow. He did not argue. That was what broke the last thread. He did not defend her, did not rise from his chair, did not say the words that would have cost him nothing and saved everything. He only said, tired and pragmatic, "Then it must be done before the equinox. Isolde's bloodline strengthens the alliance. Seraphine will understand. She always understands. She always understands. Even now, they were counting on her patience as though it were a resource they owned." Seraphine stood very still and felt the last strand of the bond give way, and with it came a silence in her mind so total it frightened her. For 3 years she had never been alone inside her own head. Now she was. The absence rang like a struck bell. She turned from the door. Her feet carried her down the corridor without command, past the tapestries she had personally restored, past the portrait gallery of Thornhold kings, who had all, she now understood, treated their queens as furniture. She walked with her chin level and her shoulders squared because the guards were watching, and a queen did not stumble, even a queen who had just learned she was a placeholder. In the great hall the fire had burned to coals. She sat on the cold hearthstone and pressed both hands flat against her chest and waited for the pain to become something she could carry. It was there, in the dying firelight, that the thought arrived, clean and hard and strangely calm. If I was only ever kept warm for someone else, then I will take back my own warmth, and I will build a fire so large they will feel it from across the mountains. That was the vow. She did not say it aloud. She did not need to. It became the spine of everything that came after. But the night was not finished with her, and neither was Thornhold. She had assumed in her grief that the betrayal was already complete, that Alaric and his mother had simply decided to set her aside and marry him to some high-born stranger named Isolde, whose bloodline strengthened alliances. She was wrong. The betrayal was older and deeper than a single conversation, and she would not understand its full shape until she stopped feeling and started watching. because Seraphine did not sleep that night. She sat by the coals until they died, and then she rose and did what she had always done best, which was to move through the keep silently and see what others assumed she was too gentle to notice. She had governed this castle in all but a name. She knew which stairwells creaked, and which servants took bribes, and which storerooms held more than grain. And so when she heard the soft scrape of a bolt being drawn in the east wing, in the disused nursery corridor that no one had walked since the old king died, her feet turned toward it before her mind gave permission. The east wing was supposed to be empty. Ophira, her mother-in-law, had ordered it sealed years ago, citing rot in the beams and danger to anyone who entered. Seraphine had never questioned it. Now she pressed herself into the shadow of a buttress and watched her mother-in-law, the Dowager Queen, glide down that forbidden corridor with a covered tray and a ring of keys, moving with the furtive speed of a woman doing something she would kill to keep hidden. Ophira stopped at the last door. She glanced over her shoulder, and Seraphine went utterly still, willing her heartbeat quiet, grateful for the first time that the broken bond had left her scent muddled and strange, hard for even a dowager's nose to read. The old woman unlocked the door, slipped inside, and Seraphine heard, faint and unmistakable, a second voice from within. A young woman's voice, frightened and pleading, asking how much longer, asking when it would be over, asking whether Alaric even knew she was still alive. Seraphine's blood went to ice, because the young woman inside that sealed room had just spoken the name Alaric with the particular ache of someone who loved him, and Seraphine understood, all at once, that the second bride had not yet arrived at Thornhold to replace her. The second bride was already here, and she had been hidden in this castle for a very long time. Seraphine did not move for a long moment. She stood in the cold dark with her palm still pressed to the dead place in her chest, and let the pieces rearrange themselves into a shape she had never allowed herself to see. Isolde was not a bride being brought to strengthen an alliance. Isolde was a prisoner, and Ophira, the woman who had smiled at Seraphine across 3 years of feasts and called her daughter, had been keeping this girl locked in a sealed wing, feeding her by hand in secret, for reasons that made the marriage in the war room sound less like politics and more like the culmination of a plan set in motion long before Seraphine ever walked through Thornhold's gates. She could have knocked. She could have flung the door open and demanded answers the way a wronged queen was entitled to, but the same instinct that had kept her from screaming in the corridor kept her hand still now. Information was the only weapon she still owned, and information given away too early was a weapon handed to your enemy. So she pressed her ear to the ancient stone, and she listened, and she learned. She learned that Ophira's voice, when she thought no one was listening, held no warmth at all. She learned that the old woman spoke to the girl inside like a farmer speaks to livestock, promising that soon the discomfort would end, that once the equinox rites were complete and the true queen was crowned, Isolde would have everything she was owed. She learned that Isolde wept and asked why she could not simply see him, why Alaric had not come, and that Ophira answered, cold as the flagstones, that the Alpha King did not yet know his mother had arranged his true bride, that men were sentimental about the wives they'd grown used to, and that some things were better done and then confessed. Some things are better done and then confessed. Seraphine turned that phrase over in the dark and felt her grief crystallize into something more useful. In the war room she had believed Alaric had chosen this. Now she understood that Alaric was, at best, only half a villain. He had agreed to set her aside for an alliance, yes, and that was betrayal enough to end a marriage. But he did not know there was a girl chained in his own east wing, He did not know his mother had been building a queen in secret, the way another woman might build a coffin. Ophira was the architect of everything. And an architect, Seraphine thought, could be made to stand inside her own collapsing house. She withdrew from the corridor as silently as she had come. Back in her own chambers, she didn't weep. She lit a single candle and she sat at the writing desk that had been her grandmother's, one of the few things she had brought into this marriage that was truly hers, and she began, methodically, to think. She thought about the girl in the East Wing, frightened and used, another woman betrayed by the same hand that had betrayed her, and she felt something unexpected. Not jealousy, kinship. Isolde was not her rival. Isolde was her fellow prisoner, and one of them was about to become free. But freedom, Seraphine knew, was not a door you walked through. It was a thing you built in advance, board by board, in the dark, while everyone assumed you were sleeping. And here was the secret that Ophira and Alaric had never troubled to learn about the gentle queen they thought they understood so completely. Seraphine had been building for a long time, not because she had foreseen this exact betrayal, but because she was the daughter of a mother who had taught her one iron law before she died. Never let your survival depend entirely on a man's affection, because affection is weather, and weather changes. So over 3 years of marriage, quietly, without a single confidant, Seraphine had prepared. She had a stash. It had begun small, a habit almost, the setting aside of coins from the household accounts that she balanced herself, and that no one else ever checked, because everyone trusted the gentle queen with the ledgers. It had grown into something far larger than coins. It had become a network, because Seraphine, unlike her husband and his mother, had never treated the low folk of Thornhold as furniture either. She had learned the names of the kitchen women and the stable hands and the old healers in the valley villages. She had sat with dying elders and delivered the babies of servants and settled disputes that the crown considered beneath its notice. She had, without ever intending it as strategy, made herself beloved by everyone in the Ravenmoor territories except the 2 people who wore crowns. And beloved people have friends. Friends who see things. Friends who, when the gentle queen came to them in the deep of night, with ice in her voice and a plan in her eyes, would not ask questions they did not need answered. The first friend she went to was Bramwell. Bramwell was old enough to remember 3 kings. He had been the keeper of Thornhold's records since before Alaric was born, a stooped and silver-bearded man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that missed nothing, and he had loved Seraphine from the first week of her marriage, when she had found him struggling to lift a chest of ledgers and had simply taken the other handle without a word about station. He was awake when she came to him, because Bramwell rarely slept, and he took one look at her face in the candlelight and set down his pen. "So," he said quietly, "you've found out." She went very still. "How long have you known?" "That the Dowager keeps a girl in the East Wing. Since the spring the wing was sealed?" His old face folded with shame. "I am a coward, my queen. I told myself it was not my place. I told myself you were happy, and I would not be the one to end it. I have hated myself for it every day since." He looked at her with roomy, steady eyes. "But I kept records. I keep everything, and if you have come to me tonight, it is because you have decided to stop being patient, and I have been waiting 3 years for that. Whatever you mean to do, old Bramwell is your man." Seraphine reached across the desk and took his ink-stained hand in both of hers, and for the first time since the war room, warmth flickered in the frozen place behind her ribs. Not the bond. The bond was dead and would not resurrect. But something else. The beginning of an army made of the people 2 proud royals had been too blind to count. "I am not going to do anything tonight," she told him. "Tonight I am only going to disappear. But before I go, I need you to teach me how to steal the truth." They worked until the sky beyond the arrow-slit windows began to grey at its lowest edge. Bramwell, it turned out, had been quietly making copies of things for years, a hoarder's instinct that now looked like foresight. He had the original marriage contracts. He had the Dowager's private correspondence, or copies of it, letters that had passed through the Keep's message room where Bramwell's grandnephew worked, letters that revealed the shape of Ofera's long game in her own coiling hand. And what those letters revealed made Seraphine set down the pages twice to steady her breathing, because the plot was larger and colder than a mother meddling in her son's marriage. Isolde was not merely well-born. Isolde was the last daughter of the Varness line, the old rival dynasty that Alaric's grandfather had crushed a generation ago, the family everyone believed extinguished. Ofera had found the girl years ago, an orphan hidden among the border villages, and had not killed her as any Thornhold instinct would demand. Instead, the Dowager had taken her, hidden her, and begun to shape her, because Ofera did not want an alliance. Ofera wanted absolute power, and the surest way to unite the 2 warring bloodlines forever, to make her grandchildren undisputed rulers of every territory from the mountains to the sea, was to marry her son to the last Varness and erase the inconvenient existing queen. Seraphine had a strong lineage, but no army behind her name. She had been chosen 3 years ago, precisely because she was safe, because she was grateful, because she would never fight back, because she was a placeholder. Now Seraphine understood the word completely. She had been married to keep the throne warm and the pack settled, while Ophira grew her weapon in secret. And the moment the weapon was ready, the placeholder was to be quietly discarded before the equinox, replaced in a single night, and the whole realm told a tidy story about a queen who had chosen to step aside for the good of the pack. Seraphine folded the letters with steady hands and slid them into the oilcloth wallet Bramwell provided. "They have made one mistake," she said. "Only one?" Bramwell asked dryly. "Only one that matters." She rose and pulled the hood of a plain travelling cloak over her hair, a servant's cloak, unremarkable, the kind no guard would look at twice. "They believed that because I never fought, I could not fight. They mistook my silence for weakness." She looked toward the east wing, toward the frightened girl who did not yet know she had just gained the most dangerous ally in the Ravenmoor territories. "I am not going to leave her here." Bramwell's eyes widened. "You mean to take the Varness girl?" "I mean to take everything Ofera needs to win and walk it out the front gate while she sleeps." Seraphine's voice was very quiet and very calm. "Isolde is not my enemy. She is the Dowager's whole plan. Without her, there is no Varness marriage, no united bloodline, no crushing of the placeholder. There is only an old woman who overreached, and a son who will one day learn what his mother did in his name." She tightened the wallet's strap. "Let them explain in the morning why both their queens are gone." The last hours before dawn were the longest of Seraphine's life, and she moved through them like a woman who had rehearsed this 100 times, though she had never rehearsed it once. She went first to the kitchens, where Mara, the head cook, was already banking the morning fires, and she did not have to explain much, because Mara had watched the Dowager carry covered trays to the sealed wing for years, and had drawn her own conclusions, and hated her own silence, just as Bramwell had hated his. Seraphine asked for 2 things: a horse and cart loaded as though for the weekly grain delivery to the valley, and the loan of the second key. because there was always a second key. Ophira had one. But the sealed wing had been part of the household stores before it was a prison, and the household stores answered to the kitchen, and Mara had never surrendered her copy. She had simply never dared to use it. She pressed it into Seraphine's palm now with a hand that trembled, and she whispered, "Bring the poor thing out, my queen. I've listened to her weep for 3 winters and told myself it wasn't my place. Let it be my place tonight." Seraphine went up the servants' stair into the east wing, while the sky in the arrow slits shifted from black to the deep, bruised blue that comes before true dawn. She unlocked the last door with Mara's key, and she stepped into a small stone room that smelled of tallow and fear and the particular staleness of a life lived without wind, and she saw Isolde Varness for the first time. The girl was younger than Seraphine had imagined, barely 20, with the pale hair and dark eyes of a bloodline everyone believed was ash. She scrambled upright against the far wall when the door opened, her whole body braced for the dowager's cold voice. And when she saw a stranger instead, her fear became something wilder and more desperate. "Who are you?" she breathed. "Has she sent you to move me?" She said it would be soon. She said, "My name is Seraphine," she said, and she kept her voice low and even and warm, the voice she had used to calm dying elders and frightened new mothers. "I am the Queen of Thornhold. I am the woman the dowager means to replace with you." She watched that land, watched the girl flinch as though she'd been struck, watched shame and terror war across her thin face. "And I am not here to hurt you. I am here to take you out of this room, and out of this castle, and out of the future that old woman has built for you like a cage. You do not have to marry a man you have never met. You do not have to be anyone's weapon. But you have to decide right now, and you have to be silent, because we have perhaps 1 hour before the keep wakes." Isolde stared at her. "Why?" she whispered. "I am the reason he's casting you out. Why would you save me?" And here Seraphine gave the answer that she would remember for the rest of her long life, the answer that made the girl's face crumple and her guard fall all at once. "Because someone should have," she said, "for both of us. Someone should have opened the door years ago, and no one did. I am tired of waiting for someone. Get up." The girl got up. Her legs were weak from years of a life measured in a single room, and Seraphine put an arm around her and half carried her down the servants' stair, and Mara met them at the bottom with a cook's cloak to hide the pale hair, and together the 3 of them walked the frightened Varness heir out through the kitchen yard and into the back of a grain cart, while the guards at the main gate stamped their feet against the cold and thought of nothing but their beds. Seraphine climbed up onto the driver's bench in her servant's cloak, and Bramwell, who had come down to see them off, handed up the oilcloth wallet of stolen truth and one thing more, a small, heavy purse that was not from her hidden stash that she had not asked for. "3 kings I've served," the old man said, his eyes wet. "You are the only royal I ever met who deserved the name. Don't come back for us. Come back for them." He nodded once toward the dark towers of Thornhold. "We'll be waiting." Seraphine could not speak. She pressed her hand to her chest, to the dead place where the bond had been, and found that it did not feel empty anymore. It felt like the foundation of something. She snapped the reins. The cart rolled through the gate at the sleepy nod of a guard who saw only grain, and out onto the mountain road, and the last thing she did as she passed beneath the portcullis of the castle, where she had been a queen and a placeholder and a prisoner all at once, was reach up and slide the crown ring from her finger, the heavy Thornhold signet that Alaric had put there 3 years ago, and let it drop into the frozen mud of the road. She took nothing they had given her. She left the ring, the title, the allowance, the name. She kept only her grandmother's desk knife in her boot, the stolen truth in oilcloth, and a frightened girl in the back of a grain cart who had, without knowing it, just become the first citizen of a country Seraphine had not yet built. By the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks and the great bell of Thornhold began to toll the alarm of 2 vanished queens, the grain cart was a mile down the valley and gone. 6 months later, the harbour city of Caldemar smelled of salt and tar and roasting chestnuts, and in the counting-house of the Greywater trading concern, a woman named Sarah Vance was doing what she did every morning, which was to quietly become the most important person in a room full of men who had not yet noticed her. She wore no crown. She wore grey wool and a leather apron of ink stains that would have made Bramwell smile, and she stood at a tall desk with a ledger open before her, and the great merchants of Caldemar brought her their disputes and their contracts and their impossible tangles of debt, because Sarah Vance could read a column of figures the way a healer reads a wound, and find the sickness in it, and name the cure. She had arrived in Caldemar 6 months ago with a half-starved girl, and a purse of coins, and no name that anyone knew. She had done then what she had always done. She had made herself useful to the people no one else troubled to see. She had settled a wage dispute between dock workers and a shipping master by finding, in 3 hours with the books, the clerk who had been skimming both sides. Word had travelled. In a port city built on contracts and trust, a woman who could find the truth in a ledger and who could not be bought was worth more than a fleet, and within 2 months Sarah Vance had gone from casual clerk to the trusted arbiter of the Greywater concern, the largest trading house on the western coast. She had a room over the counting-house, a growing reputation, and for the first time in her life, money that answered to no man's affection. Isolde had bloomed like a plant finally set in the sun. The girl who had wept in a stone room was gone. In her place was a bright, sharp young woman who had discovered a genius for languages and had made herself indispensable as the concern's translator with the southern spice fleets, and who called Seraphine in private, not my queen, but simply Sarah, and sometimes, when she was tired and grateful, sister. They did not speak often of Thornhold, but Isolde had wept in their first month when she understood what she had been saved from, and she had said a thing that Seraphine kept folded in her heart. She said, "You could have left me there and been safe. You could have let her keep her weapon and just run." And Seraphine had answered, "A cage is a cage, whether they lock you in for cruelty or for a crown. I don't leave people in cages." The world outside Caldemar remained ignorant of what it had lost, but Seraphine did not. She had built, over these 6 months, exactly the thing that Ophira had never imagined a placeholder could build: a web of eyes. Traders travel, traders gossip, and so news of the Ravenmoor territories came to her desk with the tea shipments and the wool manifests, and the news was very good in the way that watching a proud house rot from the inside is good to the one it wronged. Thornhold was failing. The morning the 2 queens vanished had cracked something in the pack that had never healed. The story Ophira tried to tell, that the gentle queen had run off in the night out of jealousy and taken a serving girl with her, convinced no one, because the low folk of the Ravenmoor territories had known and loved Seraphine, and they knew a scared servant did not vanish with the queen unless the queen was fleeing something. Rumours of a girl in the East Wing surfaced and could not be put down because too many kitchen women had carried trays past that door for too many years. The valley villagers, who had been governed by Seraphine's quiet mercy for 3 years, found themselves suddenly governed by Ophira's cold hand, and they did not care for the change. 2 of the border clans, whose loyalty Seraphine had personally secured through winters of shared grain, drifted away when the woman who had earned that loyalty disappeared. Alaric, it was said, had grown grim and short, and drank alone in the war room, and had torn the east wing apart with his own hands the morning he found the empty prison cell his mother had kept beneath his roof. That last piece of news had come to Seraphine on a wet autumn afternoon, and she had read it twice and set it down and gone to stand at the window overlooking the harbour for a long time. So he had not known. She had suspected it in the corridor and confirmed it in the letters. But here was proof, written in a trader's idle gossip. Alaric had learned, on the morning she left, that his mother had chained a Varnes girl in his home and plotted to swap his wife for her, like exchanging one mare for a better bred one, and he had, by all accounts, nearly killed the dowager where she stood. It changed nothing about what he had done to Seraphine. He had still sat in that war room and agreed to set his wife aside for an alliance without a fight. But it complicated the villain she had let herself hate, and Seraphine had learned, in 6 months of reading ledgers, that the truth was almost always more complicated than the story, and that people who dealt only in stories always lost to people who dealt in truth. She did not go back. This was the thing that surprised Isolde, and Bramwell in his careful letters, and even Seraphine herself in her weaker moments. She could have. She had, by autumn's end, the resources to hire men and the evidence to ruin the dowager and the standing to make a great deal of noise. Cheap revenge was available to her, a hot public scandal, a triumphant return. She declined it. She had watched enough merchants destroy themselves by grabbing the fast profit to know that the patient hand takes the whole board. Ophira's plot depended on the Varnes marriage, and the Varnes heir was drinking chestnut cider in a Caldemar counting house under a false name. The dowager's whole future was built on a stone that Seraphine had already quietly removed. All Seraphine had to do was let the tower fall on its own schedule and be standing in exactly the right place when it did. That place, it turned out, would be closer than she thought, because in the last week of autumn, a new client came to the Greywater concern seeking a loan and an arbiter, a great northern house on the edge of ruin, its lands mismanaged, its debts called in, its pride the only thing it had left to spend. The house sent an emissary ahead to negotiate terms, and the emissary's letter of introduction crossed Sarah Vance's desk on a grey morning, and she read the seal on it and went very still, because the seal was a raven crowned above crossed pines, and the name beneath it was one she had left in the frozen mud of a mountain road 6 months before. The failing northern house, begging the Greywater concern for a loan, was Thornhold, and the emissary they were sending to plead their case in 8 days' time was the Dowager Queen herself. Ophira was coming to Caldemar to beg for money from a woman she believed she had thrown away. Seraphine set the letter down and let the enormity of it settle over her, like the cold that had once filled Thornhold's corridors. She did not smile. She had promised herself, on the hearthstone in the dying firelight, that she would build a fire so large they would feel it from across the mountains, and here was the proof that the fire had done its work. Thornhold was burning down to its debts, and the architect of the whole disaster was about to walk into Seraphine's counting house and ask her, without knowing her, for the coin to survive. She spent the 8 days preparing the way she prepared for everything now, which was completely, silently, and without a single wasted motion. She did not tell Isolde who was coming, not yet. The girl's wounds were still tender, and Seraphine would not use her as a weapon the way Ophira had. She wrote instead to Bramwell, and to Mara, and to the 2 border clan chiefs who had drifted from Thornhold and now traded quietly through Greywater ships, and she gathered every thread of the truth she had been holding for 6 patient months. She had the dowager's own letters. She had the marriage contracts. She had the sworn, witnessed statements that Bramwell had spent half a year collecting from every servant who had carried a tray to the East Wing. She had, in short, the whole architecture of Ophira's crime laid out in documents, and she had spent 6 months learning exactly how the law of the trading cities worked, which was the one law Ophira had never bothered to understand, because Ophira understood only the law of blood and rank, and had never once imagined that a woman with a ledger could be more dangerous than a woman with an army. On the morning of the meeting, Seraphine dressed with great care. Not in grey wool this time. She wore deep green, the colour of the Ravenmoor pines, cut in the severe, elegant fashion of a Caldemar merchant lord, and she wore no jewellery at all except a single thing, her grandmother's plain silver ring, the one thing that was hers, worn now on the hand where the Thornhold signet used to sit. She arranged the counting-house's great meeting room herself. She set a tall chair with its back to the door, facing the harbour window, so that whoever sat in it would be a silhouette to anyone entering, unrecognizable until it turned. And then she sat in that chair, with the winter light of Caldemar harbour bright behind her, and she folded her hands, and she waited for her mother-in-law to be shown in. She heard them in the corridor before the door opened. She heard the clerk's deferential murmur, and she heard, unmistakable across 6 months and 200 miles, the cold, clipped voice of Ophira Thornhold, sharp with the particular irritation of a proud woman forced to be a supplicant. Yes, the arbiter, I understand. Let us be quick about it. I have not come all this way to be kept waiting by some coastal money-changer. The door opened. Seraphine did not turn the chair. For a moment there was only the sound of the dowager's steps entering, and the rustle of her expensive northern furs, and the small, self-important cough she gave to announce that she was ready to begin. "I am Ophira of Thornhold," she said to the back of the chair, to the silhouette against the bright window, taking Seraphine for a clerk or a functionary, Dowager Queen of the Ravenmoor territories. "I have business with the master of this concern, the arbiter they call Vance. You may tell your master that the House of Thornhold seeks terms, and that a house of our standing does not expect to be examined like a common debtor." Her voice carried all the old cold pride, the exact pitch of the voice that had said she was never meant to stay, and Seraphine felt the last small ember of her grief go quietly out, replaced by something clean and level and immovable. "I am the arbiter Vance," Seraphine said, still facing the window, "and I am afraid, Dowager, that a house that comes begging for coin is precisely a common debtor, whatever its standing. Standing does not pay debts. Only truth pays debts in the end." She let a silence open, the way she had learned to let silences open in negotiations, so that the other party rushed to fill them and revealed themselves. "Sit down. We have a great deal to discuss, and less of your standing to spend on it than you imagine." She heard the intake of breath, the outrage of a woman not spoken to that way in 40 years. "You would do well to remember who you are addressing," Ophira snapped. "I did not travel through the mountain passes in winter to be lectured on truth by a tradeswoman who has never—" Seraphine turned the chair. It moved slowly on its oiled pivot, swinging her out of silhouette and into the full bright light of the harbour window, and she watched the recognition arrive on Ophira's face, the way she had watched grief arrive on her own 6 months before, in stages, disbelief, and then denial, and then the terrible dawning of the truth. The dowager's mouth opened. The color drained from her powdered face. She took one step backward and put out a hand as though to steady herself against a wall that was not there, and the single word she managed to speak came out cracked and small and utterly stripped of its standing. Seraphine. Sarah Vance, Seraphine corrected her, gently, terribly. The name Seraphine belonged to a queen who was never meant to stay. You told your son so yourself, through an oak door, on the last night I wore your family's ring. I heard every word. I have carried them for 6 months. I built all of this on them. She gestured, without raising her hand very far, at the counting house around them, at the harbour beyond, at the whole prosperous, ordered world she had made from nothing. So let us not waste time pretending. You did not come to bargain with a stranger. You came, without knowing it, to beg your placeholder for the coin to save the house you burned down trying to replace her. Sit down, Ophira. I find I am no longer in any hurry at all. The dowager did not sit. She stood swaying in her northern furs, and Seraphine watched the old woman's mind race behind her eyes, watched her try and fail to find the lever, the threat, the command that would restore the order of the world in which she gave instructions, and Seraphine obeyed them. You will not, Ophira began, and her voice had gone from cold to something almost pleading, which she covered with anger the way frightened people do. Whatever you think you know, you are still bound to Thornhold. You are the Alpha King's wife. You cannot simply, your duty, my duty. Seraphine tasted the word and set it down. You spent 3 years teaching me that duty was a chain you fastened only to me and never to yourselves. I am unbound now, dowager. The bond broke the night I heard the 2 of you decide my worth over my head. You should know that, of all people. You are the one who arranged for it to break. She rose from the chair, and she didn't raise her voice, and that was somehow worse than any shouting, because a woman who does not need to shout is a woman who holds every card. You came here for a loan. Let me tell you what I know about the House of Thornhold before we discuss its terms, so that we both understand who is examining whom. And then, without ever once losing the level, courteous, dreadful calm of the arbiter's voice, Seraphine laid it out. She spoke of the east wing, and the sealed door, and the girl kept in a stone room for 3 winters. She spoke of the Varness bloodline that everyone believed was Ash, and the orphan that Ophira had found, and hidden and shaped like a weapon. She spoke of the letters in the dowager's own coiling hand, the ones that laid out the whole design, the marriage that would unite the 2 dynasties and crush every rival, the placeholder queen who was to be discarded before the equinox. She spoke of it all in the flat, precise voice of a woman reading a ledger, and she watched Ophira's face collapse further with each item, because the dowager had built her entire life on the certainty that no one had seen, that the servants were furniture, that the placeholder was too gentle to notice, and here was every hidden thing she had done recited back to her by the one person who was never supposed to have understood. You have no proof, Ophira whispered, but the whisper had no flaw beneath it. I have all of it, Seraphine said. Every letter in your hand, every statement, sworn and witnessed, from every servant who carried a tray to that door. I have had 6 months and a great many friends, dowager. You always did underestimate the people who served you. It is, if you will permit me, the single consistent flaw in a lifetime of scheming. You cannot use people you refuse to see. She let that land. But here is the part, that will interest you most, because it concerns the loan you came to beg for. Do you know why the Varness marriage will not save Thornhold now? Do you know why the alliance you built your whole design upon has already failed, months ago, before you ever set out through the passes? Ophira stared at her, and Seraphine saw the exact moment the old woman understood, saw her gaze travel toward the door of the meeting room and the counting house beyond, saw the impossible question form. And Seraphine, because mercy is sometimes only dominance worn well, answered it before the dowager had to ask. "Because I took her," Seraphine said quietly. "The night I left, I did not leave alone. Your weapon walked out of Thornhold's kitchen door in a cook's cloak, while your gate guards counted sacks of grain. Isolde Varness has been in Kaldemar for 6 months. She is free and safe, and no longer anyone's instrument, and she will tell any court in the trading cities exactly what was done to her in your East Wing. There is no marriage. There is no united bloodline. There is only an old woman who chained a child in the dark to buy herself a dynasty, and a son whose house is failing because everyone who ever loved it followed the queen you threw away." She sat back down in the tall chair, unhurried, and folded her hands. "So, you wanted terms. Let us discuss what the House of Thornhold can actually afford." Ophira sat down at last. She sat because her legs would no longer hold her, folding into the chair across the wide, dark table like a marionette with its strings cut. And for a long moment, the proud dowager of the Ravenmoor territories could not speak at all. When she did, the cold command was entirely gone from her voice, and what remained was something Seraphine had never once heard from her in 3 years of marriage: fear, naked and unguarded, the fear of a person who has finally understood that they have lost everything and cannot find the door. "What do you want?" Ophira said. It came out as barely a breath. "Money. Revenge. Say it. Whatever it is, name your price, and let us be done. Only do not—" She stopped and swallowed, and Seraphine watched her force out the words that a lifetime of pride had never let her say. "Do not destroy my son. Alaric knew nothing. Whatever you do to me, I have earned it. I will not pretend otherwise. But he learned of the girl only the morning you left, and it has broken him. Punish me. Leave him something to rule." And this Seraphine had not expected. She had expected the dowager to bargain, to threaten, to grovel for herself. She had not expected the one thread of genuine feeling in the whole cold tapestry of Ophira's schemes to be love for the son she had ruined by trying to elevate. It did not soften Seraphine, but it clarified something, and she was a woman who valued clarity above almost everything now. "I do not want your money," Seraphine said. "Look around you, dowager. I have more than Thornhold will see in a decade. I did not build this to buy back a crown I no longer want. And I do not want revenge, if by revenge you mean the hot, loud, satisfying kind, the kind that would let you leave this room able to tell yourself that I was cruel, that I was jealous, that I was after all only a bitter placeholder who lashed out when she was scorned." She leaned forward slightly. "I want something far more expensive than that. I want the truth to stand where you built a lie. That is all. And it happens that the truth, in your case, is a checkmate." She rose and crossed to the sideboard and returned with a single document, thick, sealed, official, and she set it on the table between them and did not slide it toward the dowager, so that Ophira had to reach for it herself. "This is the offer of the Greywater concern to the House of Thornhold," she said. "It is a fair offer. Fairer than you have any right to. The concern will settle Thornhold's debts, all of them, and stabilize the territories, and secure the border clans on 3 conditions, and you will find that not one of them enriches me by a single coin." She counted them off with the same level calm. "The first is that the Dowager Queen Ophira retires from all governance, publicly, permanently, to a house of contemplation in the far hills, and never again holds any office or authority in the Ravenmoor territories or anywhere else. You are finished, Dowager. Not dead, not disgraced before the world if you sign quietly. Simply finished. Your scheming days are over." Ophira's hands trembled on the document. "And the second? The second is a full pardon and a settled inheritance for Isolde Varnes, entered into the records of both Thornhold and the trading cities, restoring her name, acknowledging the wrong done to her, and granting her the freedom and the means to live wherever and however she chooses, answerable to no one, married to no one she does not choose. Her bloodline will threaten no one, because she has no wish to threaten anyone. She only ever wanted to be a person instead of a weapon. You will sign the paper that makes her one." Seraphine's voice did not change, but something in it deepened. "That is the closest thing to justice she will ever get for 3 years in a stone room, and you will give it to her with your own hand." The Dowager was weeping now, silently, the tears cutting through the powder on her cheeks, and she did not wipe them away. "And the third," she said. Seraphine looked at her for a long moment before she answered, and when she did, her voice was quieter than it had been all morning. "The third condition is that your son is told everything. Not the softened version, not the story where you were merely ambitious. Everything. The East Wing, the years of it, the marriage he was maneuvered into agreeing to, the wife who left him her ring in the mud and built a kingdom of her own by the sea. He is to know exactly what his mother did in his name, and exactly what it cost him, and he is to learn it not from gossip, but from the record, sealed and undeniable." She paused. "You wanted me to leave him something to rule. I am leaving him something better. I am leaving him the truth. What he does with it is his to answer for. But he will not spend the rest of his life believing the lie you built, and neither will the people of Thornhold who loved me. That is my price, Dowager. The truth, standing in the daylight, where you buried it. Sign the paper, or refuse it, and watch Thornhold sink into its debts, while every court in the trading cities hears the story of the Varnes girl from her own lips. Those are the terms. I am, as I said, in no hurry at all." Ophira signed. There was nothing else she could do, and they both knew it, and the scratch of the pen across the parchment was the sound of a 40-year reign of cold cleverness ending in a counting-house by the sea. When it was done, Seraphine took the document back and checked the signature and the seal with the same careful attention she gave to every ledger, and only then, satisfied, did she allow herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened settle and pass. She had won. Not loudly. Not with blood or fire or a triumphant return to a castle she no longer wanted. She had won the way water wins against stone, patiently, completely, on her own terms, and the winning felt not like triumph, but like the quiet click of a lock finally opening. Ophira rose to leave. At the door she stopped, and she turned back, and for the first time she looked at Seraphine not as a placeholder or an obstacle, but as a person, fully, the way she should have looked at her 3 years before. "I told him you always understood," the old woman said, her voice hollow. "In the war room, I said, Seraphine will understand. She always understands. I meant it as—" she faltered. "I meant it as your weakness, that you would swallow anything. I see now that I never understood you at all. You understood everything. You understood it better than any of us." She shook her head slowly. "We had a queen. We had a true queen all along, and we threw her into the mud because she was too gentle to frighten us. I will think about that in the far hills for the rest of my life." "Yes," Seraphine said, not unkindly. "I imagine you will. Goodbye, Orphera." And the Dowager Queen of the Ravenmoor territories, who had once decided Seraphine's entire worth in a single sentence through an oak door, walked out of the counting-house with her head bowed and her power spent, and Seraphine sat alone in the tall chair in the winter light and let herself, at last, breathe. The word reached Thornhold before the first snows, and it reached it exactly as Seraphine had ordered, in full and in the open, the sealed record read aloud in the great hall to a pack that had spent 6 months choking on a lie. What happened there afterward, Seraphine learned in pieces from Bramwell's careful letters and Mara's blunter ones, and the gossip of the traders who plied the mountain roads. She learned that Alaric had listened to the whole of it, standing very still by the cold hearth, and that when it was finished he had not raged, which surprised those who expected rage, but had simply walked out of the hall and up into the ruined east wing and stayed there alone until dawn. She learned that he stripped his mother of the last shreds of ceremony and sent her to the far hills himself, and that he did not weep for her going. She learned that the border clans, hearing the truth of what had driven their queen away, and hearing too that she had saved the Varnes girl rather than let her die, began cautiously to return, because a realm that would tell the truth about its own shame was a realm worth trusting again. And she learned, in the deep of winter, that Alaric had left Thornhold and ridden west to the sea. He came to Kaldemar alone, without escort or crown or the trappings of an alpha king, a broad, grim man in a plain travelling cloak, and he stood in the corridor of the Greywater counting-house the way she had once stood in a corridor of Thornhold, and he waited to be seen. Seraphine had known he would come. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, but no ledger and no strategy could entirely armor her against the sight of him, because, whatever the bond had been, and however cleanly it had broken, 3 years do not leave a person without a mark, and she felt the old ghost of a warmth stir and then quiet itself as she looked at the face she had once loved more than her own life. She received him in the same room where she had received his mother, but she did not turn the chair away from the door this time, and she did not make him a supplicant. She simply let him in and let him look at her, at the woman she had become, the merchant lord in green with the silver ring, and she watched him understand, as his mother had, that the person before him was not the one he had thrown away. He was not the one who threw her away either. Not entirely, and she found that she could hold both truths at once now, which was a thing grief had taught her. "I am not here to ask you to come back," he said at last, and she was grateful for it, because if he had asked she would have had to refuse, and the refusing would have been a cruelty she did not wish to commit. "I know I have no right to. I sat in that room and I let them decide your worth, and I did not stand up. And it does not matter that I did not know about the girl, because I knew about you, and I should have fought for you, and I didn't. There is no version of this where I am not a coward. I came only to say it to your face, because you deserved a husband who would say it to your face, and you never got one, and the least I can do now is be one for the length of a single conversation." He drew a breath, "and to say thank you, for Isolde, for the truth, for not burning us down when you had every right and every means. You could have destroyed us all. You chose the terms that saved everyone but the one who earned ruin. I have thought about that every day. I do not understand where a person finds that kind of grace. Seraphine considered him for a long moment. You find it, she said slowly, on a hearthstone, in the dark, when everything you believed about your own worth has just been taken from you, and you have to decide, alone, whether you are the small thing they said you were, or something they were too small to see. I decided. That is all grace is, Alaric. It is a decision you make about who you are going to be, made before you know whether it will ever be rewarded. She rose. I do not hate you. I want you to know that, because you will torment yourself with the idea that I do, and I would spare you that much. But I do not love you any more either, and I will not come back. And this is the last time we will speak. I have a life here that I built with my own hands, out of nothing, from the exact worth that you and your mother threw into the mud. It fits me. It is mine. Go home and rule your realm honestly and be a better king than you were a husband. That is my whole wish for you, and it is a kinder wish than you have any right to expect. He nodded, and his eyes were bright, and he did not argue, because whatever else Alaric Thornhold was, he had finally learned to hear the truth when it was spoken to him plainly. He inclined his head to her, the deep bow that a king gives only to an equal, and perhaps to something more than an equal. And then he turned and walked out of the counting-house, and out of Kuldamar, and out of her life, and Seraphine stood at the harbour window and watched his cloaked figure grow small along the quay and disappear into the winter crowd, and she found that her chest, the dead place where the bond had been, felt neither warm nor cold now, but simply whole, healed over into something new that belonged entirely to her. Isolde found her there an hour later, still at the window, and did not ask who the visitor had been, because Bramwell's letters had told her enough, and her own quick mind had guessed the rest. The girl who had once wept in a stone room came and stood beside the woman who had carried her out of it, and for a while they watched the ships together, in a silence that had no fear in it at all. "He came to release you," Isolde said at last. "In a way. To hand you back the last piece of yourself he was still holding." "Yes," Seraphine said. "I think that is exactly what he came to do." "And you took it." "I took it." She turned from the window and looked at the girl who called her sister, at the bright, fierce person who had grown out of a chained child, and she felt the one clean pride she permitted herself, which was not the pride of vengeance, but the pride of a gardener who has coaxed something living out of poisoned ground. It was mine to take. It always was. That is the whole secret, Isolde. The thing they never understood, and the thing you must never forget. They spoke of my worth as though it were a coin in their purse, something they had given me, and could take back. But worth is not given. It is not a crown someone sets on your head and can lift off again. It is the thing that is left when the crown is gone, and the ring is in the mud, and the bond is broken, and you are alone on a cold hearthstone in the dark, and it is either there or it is not. And mine was there. Yours was there, too, all along, under all that fear. It was always there. Isolde's eyes filled, and she did not hide it, because she had learned from Seraphine that tears shed for the right reasons were not weakness. "I would still be in that room," she said, "if you had chosen safety over me. I think about it every day, the same way he does. You had every reason to leave me, and no reason to save me. And you saved me anyway." "I had one reason," Seraphine said. "The same reason I gave you the night I opened the door. Someone should have, for both of us. No one ever did, so I decided to be the someone. That is the only revenge that was ever worth taking, in the end. Not to burn their house down, to build a better one, and to fill it with the people they threw away, and to let them see, from across the mountains, the size of the fire they could have warmed themselves at if they had only known what they had." She smiled then, rare and real and warm, the warmth that landed all the harder for how seldom she spent it. "Come. We have the Southern Manifests to finish before the tide turns, and you promised Mara you would write to her about the spice contracts. The living have work to do." And they did the work, that day and the next, and through all the long-ordered years that followed. And the Greywater concern grew until Sarah Vance was a name spoken with respect in every harbour on the western coast, and Isolde Varness became a great lady of the trading cities in her own right, free and answerable to no one, married at last to a man she chose entirely for herself. Thornhold, chastened and honest, recovered slowly under a king who had learned the cost of silence, and never again did the Ravenmoor territories treat a queen as furniture. Bramwell lived long enough to visit the sea, and wept when he saw it, and old Mara sent chestnuts every winter. And the woman who had once been a placeholder never wore a crown again, because she had learned that she had never needed one, and that a fire you build yourself gives more warmth than any throne. If this story moved something in you, if you felt the cold of that corridor and the heat of that hearthstone, do this for me now. Give it a like so it reaches another soul who needs the reminder. Share it with someone you know who has been told they were less than they are, because they need to hear that their worth was never anyone's to give or take. Subscribe and stay, because we tell stories like this one here, stories of the discarded who rise, every single week. And tell me below, in a line, the exact moment you knew Seraphine was going to be all right. I read every one,